We are studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which he describes as one of the most obscure and the profoundest of the Upanishads. The symbolism we have seen is not only profound but compact, and it is easy for the modern mind to discard the imagery used as merely an allegory. But as we have seen in the text, it is a profoundly mystic description which tends to draw us into an intuitive vision or a spiritual experience. The picture which has been cast in the first verse of this Upanishad is the picture of a horse. And this horse is now described in all its parts. And each of the parts of the horse is associated with a certain power or function or aspect of a universal experience. Om, dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. The sun is his eye. His breath is the wind. His wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse sacrificial. Heaven is his back, and the mid-world his belly. Earth is his footing. The regions are his flanks, and the lesser regions their ribs. The seasons his members. The months and the half-months are their joints. The days and nights are his standing place. The stars his bones, and the sky is the flesh of his body. The strands are the food in his belly. The rivers are his veins. His liver and his lungs are the mountains. Herbs and plants are his hairs. And so on, the description continues. I don't read the entirety of the verse. But we see immediately in this imagery that it is cosmic. It looks at the whole universe, and all the powers and functions of the universe are as if drawn together in a single symbol, and they fit perfectly in the symbolism that is carried in this picture of the horse sacrificial. Sri Aurobindo in his commentary has already prepared us for a different approach to study the text, that we must allow the verses to sink into our souls, mold from within, vibrate in resonance, and allow the knowledge and the experience to emerge from our hearts. And then, as his commentary progresses, Sri Aurobindo as if leans into the perception of the modern mind, and part by part, bit by bit, draws us directly deeper into the intuitive sense of this whole description. And I will here briefly digress to highlight the difference between the rational approach and the intuitive approach. I take the image, let's say, of a normal material horse. And the rational approach here is to observe the horse, to study the different parts, describe the members, describe the proportions, and thus by a description that uniquely separates the horse from, let's say, the cow or the monkey or the human, identify and distinguish this creature. If you put a horse next to a cow, they're very similar. They both have heads, tails, legs. What is it that makes the horse horse? And the rational mind will then describe the peculiar distinctive characteristics of the snout or the horns, or the way the tail is shaped, the proportions of the legs, the proportions of different parts of the body. And by those characteristics, separate the horse from the cow. The rational approach measures, describes form, distinguishes, separates, and exaggerates, highlights certain parts and functions. The intuitive approach is very different. It begins not from the outside to capture the inner distinction, it begins from the inside and describes the outsides as a function of the inner. So the intuitive approach will look at the horse and the cow and not count the legs and tail and shape and proportion, but feel what the horse feels. The intuitive vision experiences the horseness of the horse, the cowness of the cow, and already in that very first identification you can feel how these two are different. In the horse, we experience that speed and that power, that energy that is withheld, waiting to be released, a static power which can at any moment be unleashed into a dynamic power and movement. The cow is completely different. You do not say both have 4 legs and so they are similar. They are completely different to begin with. The cow is quiet, introvert, almost mild, gentle, sattvic, a kind of a illumined clarity of consciousness. It looks, it perceives, it rests in that perception, and so different from the horse. And then from this quite obvious, intense difference, the intuitive sense leans to the form of the creatures. And as the horse moves to express its speed and power, it reaches out and gallops with its 4 feet. Its neck leans forward, its tail rises and floats in the air. The cow, on the other hand, gently steps forward and walks in rest and gently grazes, assimilating, absorbing as it grows. And the functions and form of the legs, the mouth, the head, the tail are described as an outcome of this essential character of the thing in itself, the being in itself. And this is the intuitive approach as distinct from the rational, intellectual, or as we generally say, mental approach. When we study this text of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it is with an intuitive consciousness that we have to approach. We could just as well read the text and observe these imageries, analogies, symbolisms, parables. But then we would be lost in the formal appearance and think it weird, strange. Why would they make this kind of an association? I would have put it very differently, I say. But when we approach the same image from an intuitive sense, we feel how these different facets of cosmic existence are interrelated. And then we find how they naturally fit together in this grandiose image of the horse of the worlds. And as we proceed, Sri Aurobindo's commentary will show us how these different parts actually connect to each other and how they fit in that large image of the cosmos which the rishis hold. The second important distinction in our study is that we do not look at the cosmos merely as the physical universe, because the Vedic rishis saw the totality of the cosmos as all these worlds interpenetrating, interrelating, and the totality as their vision of the cosmos. So we too must, to fully appreciate this description, look at all of these planes of existence as one large pile, one world of so many levels or domains. And this Sri Aurobindo will elaborate as we proceed. In the portion we read last time, Sri Aurobindo has already discussed the word Ashva, literally meaning in the modern sense particularly simply horse. But in his deeper description, Sri Aurobindo identifies this root, Ashva, with the sense of strength and swiftness. And he says, its fundamental meanings are therefore pervading existence, enjoyment, strength, solidity, speed. Shall we not say therefore that Ashva to the Rishis meant the unknown power made up of force, strength, solidity, speed and enjoyment that pervades and constitutes the material world? In the verse itself, in Sanskrit, Om Ushava Ashvasya Medhyasya Shirah. Usha is the horse sacrificial's head. And this we could now simply translate as being dawn is the leading forward movement of this power and force that pervades and constitutes the material world. And when you read the verse in this way, it makes tremendous sense. But the imagery will further open out deeper insights as we proceed. Sri Aurobindo must pause to convince the rational mind that this does make sense and it's not just some fanciful reading. He says, but there is a danger that etymological fancies may mislead us. It is necessary, therefore, to test our provisional conclusion from philology by a careful examination of the images of this parable. Yet before we proceed to this inquiry, it is as well to note that in the very opening of the second Brahmana, the Rishi passes on immediately from Ashva the horse to Ashanaya Mrityu, hunger that is death, and assigns this hunger that is death as the characteristic, indeed the very nature of the force that has arranged and developed, evolved, as the moderns would say, the material worlds. So here Sri Aurobindo, before elaborating on the image, to verify, he looks at the very next chapter. And in that chapter, in his translation, I read, the verse goes like this: formerly there was nothing here. This was concealed by death, by hunger, for it is hunger that is death. That created mind. And he said, let me have substance. He moved about working, and as he worked, the waters were born. And he said, felicity was born to me as I worked. This verily is the activity in action. Therefore, felicity cometh to him who thus knoweth this soul of activity in action. Now, if we read this verse by itself, we would say, what is this? What is all this description? It makes no sense at all. But Sri Aurobindo has fortunately revealed the secret of this whole imagery. And while the first verse describes this cosmic movement of a stupendous energy unfolding and manifesting as this material universe and forming the cosmos, you see this verse now so clearly in place. Formerly there was nothing here. Before things were manifested, there was nothing here. This was concealed by death, by hunger, for it is hunger that is death. And the nature of the material universe, as we have seen repeatedly in other studies of Sri Aurobindo's commentaries. The whole material world is predominated by this hunger. It is death of hunger, eating and destroying, which sustains and forms the nature of the material universe. Everything eats everything else. And even as it is eating other things, it is itself eaten. And it is this movement of eating while being eaten which is the character of the material universe. It is not the character of the life world. It is not the character of the mental world or the spiritual worlds beyond. But in matter, this is what it is. Modern physics describes it in different ways. It describes how particles assimilate or absorb other particles to become other particles, and then themselves break up to become raw material for other particles. And there is this continuous flowing in of forms, and as the form is formed by absorbing other forms, itself breaks down to become nourishment for still greater forms to follow. We see the same tendency in the larger biological life cycles in matter. The animal has to eat the grass has to eat matter. But the animal itself is being eaten from within by the bacteria and other creatures. Eventually, all its body becomes the raw material for the grass to eat and become fresh plants. And we see this cycle of life as we describe it in biology. But what is this cycle except a tremendous hunger which takes in everything around it and continues in a drive which is unending of eating while being eaten. And we even define life in these terms in biology. But that is life which is embedded, bound in matter. It is not the pure life force in its freedom. So you see here in the next chapter, Sri Aurobindo draws reference to the text simply because it supports immediately the symbolism that Sri Aurobindo is describing. The Rishi passes on immediately from Ashva the horse to Ashanaya Mrityu, hunger that is death. And assigns this hunger that is death as the characteristic, indeed the very nature of the force that has arranged and developed the material worlds. But this force is not the hunger that is death. This force is greater. It comes down through the different worlds, and in the most material part it becomes this, or organizes itself as this hunger that is death in the material world. So we will see the image itself is much larger. In the portion we read right at the beginning, you will recall, the text goes that heaven is his back, the mid-world his belly, earth is his footing. Then these relate to the mental world, the vital world, and the material world. So this horse of the worlds, described by the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, is a gigantic horse spanning the three worlds. Back is the heaven, the swar, and the mid-world, the vital domain, is the belly, and it is only at the feet that you experience the nature of the material world. But on top of the horse, it is carrying beings. It carries the gods, the Gandharvas, the Titans, and the human beings. And you will see in this image immediately the idea that, especially from the human perspective, the human being as the soul is carried as if by this gigantic cosmic movement. But of that we will speak later. For now, he says something very interesting as an aside, in passing. He says the nature of the force that has arranged and developed the material worlds, and then a parenthetical comment, evolved, as the moderns would say. And here's a very important idea which has been cause for, unfortunately, many misunderstandings and misrepresentations. There is this word evolution, which is, we say, a modern word. But the idea of evolution is not modern, it is not new. It is only this term and its particular usage which is new. And in the domain of material science and biology, evolution is that process by which a particular form of life tends to develop, become more complex, develop capacities, and become more refined and elaborate in its expression until it becomes as if a different form. And evolution, in the modern understanding, is the outcome of spontaneous, random changes and a struggle to survive which eliminates the lesser and weaker forms, and then only the superior form survives. And this is how we see evolution. And so it looks like a new idea. But in the ancient texts, the same idea exists. It uses a different vocabulary. It does not focus so much on survival and the struggle for survival. It does not see those changes as spontaneous. Because this is the difference between the rational approach and the intuitive approach. The rational sees the form, sees the changes of form across 1,000,000 years, cannot explain why. And what it cannot explain, it says, is chance. By saying chance, we have covered up our ignorance and made it appear as if we know something that we don't. And we say it happens by chance, so here's a great discovery of science. And it changes, well, over time it has become more complex, so there must be something, well, it must be a struggle, it must be a fight which eliminated the inferior. It's a speculation. It is a presumption. At no time has biology or evolutionary biology proved that this is how the evolution has taken place. We assume it is so, and then we teach it as if it is. The fact is, and this is the reality we see if we observe any struggle in the forest, the more refined and developed a creature is, the more vulnerable. Often it is the crude brute force which overwhelms and destroys the refined. So how can evolution have happened simply by survival of the fitter? The ancients saw the thing differently. They saw from the intuitive, that is from the inside out. And what did they experience? They experienced this great power. And we used the analogy earlier, the example of the horse and the cow. This great power which has taken a form on earth, taken on a body, but the power itself is greater than the form. The power itself carries a tremendous potential which is not fully expressed in the form. And as this power tries to express its greater potential, it has to stretch the possibilities of the form. It changes the form. It changes the behavior of the form. And over time it unfolds and arranges itself, organizes itself in more complex, more complete terms and forms. And that is what we would say in the modern terms, evolution. So, Sri Aurobindo puts it thus: indeed, the very nature of the force that has arranged and developed the material worlds, evolved, as the moderns would say. So evolution is simply described as arranging, developing, unfolding, etc. The image is clearly seen in the symbolism of the 10 avatars, that at every stage in evolution, when a new form had to emerge, nature did not have in herself the capacity to make that breakthrough, to give form to a new level of consciousness, a new possibility. And it needed an intervention from above, the divine himself entering with great strength and power into the material form and emerging as this new form. So there is the fish, where the divine manifests as the fish, the tortoise, the wild boar, the dwarf man, the physical man, the rajasic vital man, the mental ideal sattvic man, and so on. But you see, at each step, the power must enter the form and break through. And once that is established, nature as if can continue the rhythm and make the smaller incremental changes. We had a fascinating discussion in an international meet of which was called Sufi Yogi Dialogue. So on the one hand you had the Sufi practitioners, and on the other hand you had practitioners from the yogic tradition, and sharing and discussing perspectives. And it's amazing how we use different words to describe similar or even sometimes the same experiences. And one of the problems we faced was the Sufis said, we don't like the word evolution. Please do not use it in this dialogue. And this was a problem because from the yogic perspective, it is central to the whole purpose of human existence and the cosmos itself. So we had to find a way, and we said, is it all right if we speak of development, unfoldment? And they said, there's no problem with those words. Just that word evolution, we have a problem. And the problem, they said, traced back to the association which comes from the conflict with modern science, which suggests that as evolution proceeds, something new comes into being which was not there before. And they said, as far as we are concerned, God has created the whole universe perfectly, and everything is already expressed. And so there cannot be anything new that comes into being. So therefore we don't like this idea of evolution. And when you look at the two in the way it's articulated, it looks like they are in conflict. But if in the yogic terms we see the same truths, and we have exactly the same words in the Isha Upanishad, that the Lord has arranged all things perfectly according to their innate nature from the very beginning. And we would say, well, we are speaking the same words. But the understanding is that that arrangement is not merely an arrangement in space. It is also an arrangement in time. And the unfolding of potential in time is also part of His arrangement. He has arranged that all things should unfold their potential and grow, which possibility of growth is already held latent in the very seed, in the very beginning, and is only unfolding, rearranging, and developing itself. And so the idea of evolution is already there. And here the force that has arranged and developed the material worlds evolved, as the moderns would say. Dawn, says the Rishi, is the head of the horse sacrificial. And Sri Aurobindo now elaborates on this. Now the head is the front, the part of us that faces and looks out upon our worlds. And dawn is that part to the horse of the worlds. This goddess, because it is Usha, dawn as the divine goddess, this goddess must therefore be the opening out of the world to the eye of being. For as day is the symbol of a time of activity, night is a time of inactivity, so dawn images the imperfect but pregnant beginnings of regular cosmic action. And now Sri Aurobindo is going into the deeper sense of the word Usha. When in modern conversation we ask, what is the meaning of Usha? People say, it means dawn. It's a name, common name given to many people. It means dawn. But why does it mean dawn? In most of the modern languages, this deeper root connection with the essential psycho-spiritual truth has been lost. The modern languages are a formulation of the rational intellect, although they derive from an intuitive language. And so the rational intellect, looking at forms, simply makes associations. This word has this meaning. We have dictionaries which connect one language to another. This word in this language is corresponding to that word in that language. It looks like a one-to-one match, except when you really go into the nuances of the word, you don't find an exact match. Each word in each language has so many associations, implications, cultural suggestions, and facets which do not have exact correspondences across languages. And when we start translating, we find it very difficult to translate, to convey the true sense, because you do not have exact equivalent words. And at this point, we suddenly realize that the words are only a superficial form. Behind is this domain which is experience, to which we give a word. And in each language, according to the development of that language, the development of the culture in which the language developed, there is a particular clustering, as if a concentration of a bunch or a range of experience into this word, which is now formulated and fixed into this sound. And it's different across languages, across cultures, across time. The same word across time evolves in its meanings and associations. When you say today, can you please explain this? We understand by it, give meaning, elaborate. But if you go back in the English language 500 years, explain means to unfold and make flat. So we would actually say in the English language 500 years ago, please explain the mat. Today if we say please explain the mat, you say, what are you talking about? Explain, make plain, by extension, by unfolding. And explain now by over time has meant in thought to unfold, to unroll and make plain, make clear, make obvious. That is explain. The word has still retained the original sense but is now applied in a very different domain. It is no more material, it is now applied in the thought domain. But if you go back, you do not see a break, you see a continuity. And you can go back even to certain root sounds in which the full origin of the word would become obvious. But as we go into the old languages, especially with Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, we find those connections are still very strong, and the intuitive sense behind the word is very strong. The experience comes first, the word only articulates the experience. So when the same text is read from an intuitive language consciousness, Usha has a very different meaning, as in the mental consciousness which reads the same word and sees immediately the picture of dawn. Sri Aurobindo later, and I skip a few lines, he says, the word Ushas means etymologically coming into manifest being. It could mean also desire or yearning. And you see immediately the sense when we read the first word, the first verse, like this. Ushava ashvasya medhyasya shirah. So the coming into being, the yearning to manifest, is the head of this speed power that moves to become the whole cosmos. And you see now it is describing a powerful spiritual experience. At the same time, it uses the imagery of the horse and the parts of the horse. So we reread this portion. The head is the front, the part of us that faces and looks out upon our world. And dawn, Usha, is that part to the horse of the worlds. This goddess must therefore be the opening out of the world to the eye of being. I'll again step back. He says here, the head is the front, the part of us that faces and looks out upon our world. We could just as easily have said, the chest is the front and the part of us that faces out to look out on the world, or the belly, or the feet pointing forward. Why don't we say that? We do not find in our experience as a human being that the chest, the belly, or the feet are the part facing the world. Our experience subjectively is the head is where I face the world. And that's why language has evolved to say face the world, not chest the world, not kick the world, but face the world. When in my facing the world, I find myself profoundly embarrassed, I say, I hide my face in shame. Because that is the part of me that reaches out to meet everybody. And that is the part of me that I draw back when I hide in shame. I don't hide my hands or my feet or my chest. It's my face. So the subjective experience of the human being and of the horse and of the cow and of every creature is that the head is the part which reaches out to face the world and look out upon the world. Why is this? I'm going to stretch this discussion a little more because we have to understand the intuitive approach more deeply. I'm going to now reverse the whole argument of modern biology and describe the same thing from an intuitive perspective. When the human being took birth on earth, when the human consciousness took on a body, the consciousness in its purity, now free of form, had to identify with form or take on a form. As it took on the form, the part of the consciousness that reached out to relate to the world stretched itself in front and took on a special extension in the body. That part we experience as the head. You see how it looks from the intuitive sense. The pure consciousness has no direction, has no front or back, top or down. It is essentially directionless, even you can say infinitesimal point, equal in all directions. But when it moves from pure consciousness into form, in form it has to organize its different powers. There's a power that leans out to reach out to engage with the world, look upon the world. And there is a power which holds back, withdraws. There's a power which reaches out to act in the world. There's a power which reaches out to move in the world. Each of these powers organizes itself in specific forms optimized to express that quality. So the part that reaches out to look out and face the world is the part we call the head. The part that reaches out to engage with, to change the world, is the part we call our arms. And the specialized extension of that energy, which intricately, minutely engages with the world, is what we call the fingers. Why are there 5 fingers? Because there are 5 facets to that engagement, because the world consists of 5 gradations of consciousness that we call the 5 elements. And so to reach out to engage with the world completely, you would have had to have 5 specializations and therefore 5 fingers. Suddenly it makes so much sense. And seen from within, we would say, this is the reality. Seen from outside, from the mental perspective, oh, you're making symbolic connections, associations. No, it's not a symbolic connection. This is the reality of the consciousness that it moves to manifest. And so the ancients, because they saw from the intuition from inside out, they looked at the 5 fingers and said, each of these fingers has a natural affinity with one of the 5 elements. It makes so much sense now, isn't it? But if you actually look at the functions of the 5 fingers, you will find the associations to be obvious. Why 2 arms? We could have had simply 1 arm with specialization. 2 arms because, again, in that reaching out to engage with the world, there are 2 facets. The engagement has 2 sides which are distinct. There's one side that takes in, another side that pushes out, and they're both equally important in the engagement. Unless both are equally balanced, the engagement is not complete. And so there has to be a left and a right. And you will see in the nature of the functions of the 2 hands, the right tends to be more outgoing, the left, or otherwise we may exchange roles. But in the energy of the movement, the left is incoming, the right is outgoing. In the subtle body particularly, it's much more obvious that the circulation of energy is in this way, from left, absorbing in the left, pushing out from the right. Therefore, by extension, when we give something, we give with the right hand. We don't give with the left hand, because it would mean reaching out to take rather than give. Now, all of these things we could say, oh, these are symbolic. No, they are not symbolic. These are the reality when experienced from the intuitive consciousness, the intuitive experience. But once we disengage from the intuitive experience and look now from outside in, from the forms, from the rational, intellectual, physical mind, we say, oh, these are symbolisms, analogies, correspondences. Oh, these ancients, they exaggerated all these symbols. They made all these strange rules. We could have changed the rules. But now we are in the intuitive consciousness, and we see how the third power which I spoke of, which allows us to move around, and this power as it organizes itself becomes what we call our legs. And again it has specializations and feet and the toes, which are again 5. The whole human body, therefore, is the spontaneous, natural self-expression of this essential human consciousness as it moves to manifest itself in the material world. And if this is the form that it takes spontaneously, the obvious implication would be anywhere in the universe it would tend to be of this form. Mother makes a very interesting comment about this. She says there are beings everywhere in the universe, even sometimes made of different kinds of substance, different kind of biological arrangements. But she says, overall, this is the universal form. The head, 2 arms, 2 legs, torso. You can go on any planet, any creature, and you'll find this similarity. Because precisely, this is the prototype of the free expression of the divine moving into manifestation as human consciousness. If we move further now to the supramental being in the human evolution, we find again a similar form. Variations, of course, fundamental variations in the nature of the substance, but the form is still the same. And you will recall Mother's description when she saw on the borderline between the form and the formless the prototype of the supramental being. She says it was genderless, but it had the same overall human type. The point I am highlighting is the intuitive experience holds this immediately, that the part of us that projects forward is the head, because it's the part which reaches out to meet. It is Usha because it is the part that reaches out, yearning, desiring, coming into manifest being. And now the description, the very first verse and the first line of the first verse is something so obvious. It's not symbolism, it's an obvious description of an experience. This goddess must therefore be the opening out of the world to the eye of being. For as day is the symbol of a time of activity, night of a time of inactivity, so dawn images the imperfect but pregnant beginnings of regular cosmic action. And here's something even more profound now. What is day? What is night? And we have seen in the same text, there is the description of day and night in relation to the cosmic horse. And it says in verse 2, day was the grandeur that was born before the horse as he galloped. The eastern ocean gave it birth. Night was the grandeur that was born behind him, and its birth was from the other waters. You see immediately day in the front, night at the back of the cosmic movement to manifest. And Sri Aurobindo now explains this in these words. Day is symbol of the time of activity, night of the time of inactivity. So the forward movement builds activity, and what is left behind, trails behind, subsides or slides into inactivity. If you think of the whole universe as one gigantic power that is moving ever forward, unfolding itself in time, evolving, as we may say, the very focus, the cutting edge, is this intense energy forming new things. The open mouth of the horse, which is fire. We will come to that shortly. That's the cutting edge. The muzzle of the horse right at the front. And the back trails off, fades off. What is past, what is no more relevant for the future, gradually weakens, breaks down, decays, and fades, subsides into inactivity. And after a while you say, where is this? It's gone. While at the same time something new which is coming is up there, forming itself, emerging. And this is true not only in the domain of pure matter, where forms emerge and other forms lapse, it is true equally of our life. The cutting edge of our unit, if we may say, of the individual, the family, the nation, the earth as a whole, is this sharp edge of the children, the life force emerging, fresh, new. And on the other edge is the fading out, gradually weakening and subsiding. It is equally true of ideas. New ideas are on the cutting edge, they catch the fancy of people, and people are suddenly mesmerized by this wonderful new idea. And then there's something which is an old idea, it has lost its strength and energy, and it's fading out. And you say, oh, those are things not so interesting anymore. So there's this whole movement surging forward of day and the inactivity of night. So what is dawn? Because that's the midpoint between day and night. It was night, and the day is just beginning, not yet come into fullness. So dawn, he says, so dawn images the imperfect but pregnant beginnings of a regular cosmic action. As the sun is rising, we do not yet see the sun, but the light is out. And you see this cosmic action which is beginning, but it is still imperfect. And yet, in that very early light is the promise of the full emergence of the form and the manifestation. So it is pregnant, it is carrying within it the potential, the power, the capacity of its own fulfillment. The imperfect but pregnant beginnings, and all the rest of unfoldment has to follow. Beginnings of what? Regular cosmic action. When something comes into manifestation, at first, it has this still unformed, imperfect prototype, as we may say. But once it has been stabilized and made perfect, it goes on repeating. And that's the regular cosmic action. Anything new created, an idea, a form, even a new living being, follows this. First a haphazard, imperfect formation, and then when it comes into its own, it sustains in rhythm. And this aspect of rhythm is critical to our full understanding of the text. As we will see later, he says, the text goes, time is the self of the horse sacrificial. And time here, the word used, is not ordinary time, but the unfolding of time. It's not the essential sense of time as an abstract idea, but time unfolding in its rhythms, in its seasons. That's the self of the horse. So all of these ideas are deeply interconnected. When we speak here of the dawn emerging, dawn is preparing for this rhythmic, regular cosmic action which is going to follow, but she's only carrying the pregnant beginnings, still imperfect. And now he elaborates, what does this mean, Usha? It is the being's forward movement, being, capital B, that is the divine being, the divine himself as he moves to manifest. It is the being's forward movement. It is its impulse to look out at the universe in which it finds itself and looking towards it, to yearn, to desire, to enter upon possession of a world which looks so bright because of the brightness of the gaze that is turned upon it. This whole description is also preparing us for the other parts of the symbol. You will remember the sun is his eye. The sun is the eye of this cosmic horse. And the brightness here is describing that function which will follow shortly. But right now it's this being's impulse, forward movement. And the impulse looks out at the universe in which it finds itself, and looking towards it to yearn, to desire, to enter into possession of a world. This description captures what the forward movement of evolution is like. And it has several facets. First, there is this impulse forward, but the impulse looks out at the universe. As the evolutionary energy moves, it looks at what is next. Because unless it sees what it must become, it cannot move to become it. This we will describe now on two levels. At the highest level, you remember the supermind. As it moves to manifest, it sees. And in the seeing is the power to express. So the highest power of creation is a seeing power which becomes what it sees. But equally for us, in the symbol of the human or the animal or every other creature, this part of the energy that leans out to become the head to face the world and meet the world has as its most powerful agent to face the world the eyes that see. And when we walk, when we move forward, we must see, otherwise we cannot move. If for some reason our eyes are closed, you see how we walk, we put out our hands. We must extend a part of ourselves to reach out to sense that which is before us. And only in relation to that which we see do we move forward. So if the eyes are closed, some other energy must reach out to feel, to sense, to see in other means, by other senses. If that doesn't happen, if our hands are bound, with our ears we reach out. You notice if you're to walk with your eyes closed and your hands bound, your hearing would now focus in front. So the point of the seeing here is not so much the specifics of the physical sight, but the consciousness, pure consciousness reaching out to gaze on what must be and where we want to go, and then move into what we see. The essential power is this pure consciousness turning to see, of which the physical biology has organized the eyes and the machinery of the eyes. So we will say from the intuitive perspective, because there was this energy leaning out to see, it organized itself and formed a suitable organ that became the eyes. It is its impulse to look out at the universe in which it finds itself, and looking towards it, to yearn, to desire, to enter upon possession of a world. So the moment you see, immediately you want to yearn, to desire, and to possess. Now in the human experience, this takes a very crude form. I saw this wonderful food, I crave for it, I want to possess and eat it. It's a crude form, extended in different ways. The conqueror looks at a bright new land and says, I want to claim it. But all of this is a degraded, lower representation of a much more profound spiritual energy. As it looks, as it sees a potential, it yearns to manifest that potential. It yearns to enter and experience that potential from within, possessing the full experience. You will remember Sri Aurobindo's description in those lines from Savitri, where he describes how the soul looks out at the possibility of the universe, even the opposite experience of a world of darkness and conflict, from its too safe eternity, and then it yearns to experience that. And then he says there, for what the soul sees becomes a world. So it is the pure seeing of the supermind as it looks at a possibility and it reaches out to become and to possess in the very becoming. It is what it sees and becomes and enjoys from within. This is the nature of the soul experience of the world. While our mind sees, is attracted or repelled and reacts in different ways, the soul looks at a possibility, a potential, and it yearns to experience that, and it enjoys, and it wants to identify itself with the experience and grow through that identification. So, to yearn, to desire to enter upon possession, and goes from yearning, desiring to possessing, of a world which looks so bright because of the brightness of the gaze that is turned upon it. The suggestion is that the brightness of the world which attracts is not because of something inherent in the world, not because of some other sun which is lighting up or because of something out there. It is the brightness of the gaze that has turned which makes the world bright. And again, from a spiritual perspective, it is something profound. In the Brahman, all possibility exists. equally, simultaneously. When the creative gaze of the divine now turns to a possibility, that gaze, the fact that he dwells his attention, his consciousness on that possibility, lights up, highlights, we will say, intensifies that possibility, and therefore makes it so attractive, so real. And so the being moves now to manifest and become that possibility. So the seeing here is lighting up, highlighting an aspect, a possibility out of the infinite potential that is all simultaneously in Brahman. And it is this frontal edge, looking, gazing, and lighting up and unfolding, yearning, seizing, and enjoying, possessing, which is the head and the gaze of the cosmic creative movement of the cosmic horse. And you see now the whole image is so profound. When you meditate on it, it unfolds and reveals so many layers upon layers, but always deepening an experience which we have. And we end this briefly by reading. The word ushas means etymologically coming into manifest being, and it could mean also desire or yearning. Ushas or dawn to the early thinkers was the impulse towards manifest existence, no longer a vague movement in the depths of the unmanifest, but already emerging and on the brink of its satisfaction. And you see how it captures so perfectly this edge of the movement of manifestation, already on the brink of its satisfaction. For we must remember that we are dealing with a book full of mystical imagery, which starts with and looks on psychological and philosophical truths in the most material things, and we shall miss its meaning altogether if in our interpretation we are afraid of mysticism. So the mindset of the Vedic seers was to see these psychological and philosophical truths in the most material things. And this is what we have tried to do in our study now, and the image and the experience that we have been forming. And I would suggest perhaps we can even take it a step further and imprint that experience in our own consciousness, that when we look at the dawn, Usha, as the sun rising, we can see in it a cosmic movement of this awakening and holding on the brink of satisfaction the emerging potential. We can also look at our own body and recognize our body, like the image of the horse or the cow or every other creature, is a profoundly mystical, symbolic expression of the spiritual consciousness that we are in essence. And each of the limbs and parts of our body carries an aspect or a power of the spiritual being that we are in truth. Our head, our sight, our arms, thus, will no more be seen by us as merely tools accidentally created by a biological evolution of survival of the fittest, but rather as a conscious means of self-expression of the soul as it moved to manifest in the material world. And we should begin to care for our body and use its powers and faculties with this deeper appreciation. For now, we will pause here and continue next Sunday. I will read the first line of the verse and we will meditate on it for a couple of minutes. Om Ushava Ashvasya Medhyasya Shiraha. Om. Dawn is the head of the horse sacrificial. The sun is his eye. His breath is the wind. His wide open mouth is fire, the master might universal. Time is the self of the horse sacrificial. Heaven is his back, and the midworld his belly. Earth is his footing.